Afternoon, good evening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining this session on internet shutdowns in the Middle East and North Africa. My name is Qasem Mnija, and I'm the Middle East and North Africa campaigner at Access Now. As we are all too aware, the past year has been deeply scarred by conflicts and violence that have not only disrupted lives, but has also posed significant challenges to human rights, to fundamental human rights across our region. From the ongoing genocidal war on Gaza that is still continuing, with over 35,000 people in Palestine killed since October the 7th, we've seen the most horrific images in the recent months, from bombing, the targeting of people, as well as the destruction of civilian infrastructure across the Gaza Strip. In Sudan, the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces is also continuing, with fighting intensifying in the past couple of days. Since April 2023, between 13,000 and 15,000 people have been killed in Sudan, and more than 30,000 have been injured. Over 6.5 million have been internally displaced, with more than 2 million fleeing the country being refugees. In Iran, violations continued, including the targeting of religious and ethnic groups, as well as the continued targeting of activists and women and labor activists. So across the region, we continue to witness a crackdown on freedom of expression, on freedom of association and assembly, and a crackdown on the offline spaces. But these violations that we're seeing on those offline spaces are also mirrored into the online world. From the different cybercrime laws and legislations that we're seeing to the targeting of free speech online, this past year has seen many of us continue to fight and to push back against digital rights violations to many across the region. So on that, internet shutdown have continued to be one of the favorite tools and tactics that a lot of governments across our region continue to use. Internet shutdowns, which often are imposed during times of conflict, times of war or crisis or protests, are tools that obscure the truth and disrupt the free flow of vital information. They have a profound impact not only on freedom of expression, but also on the ability to access critical information and the impact that they play in terms of documenting human rights abuses. The consequences of such actions affect everything from individual safety to the safety of society and people, and at times separates between life and death. Today, Access Now and the Keep It On Coalition have launched their new report titled Shrinking Democracy, Growing Violence, Internet Shutdown in 2023. This new report exposes the impact and destruction of these brutal internet shutdowns and attacks on human rights across 2023, which was the worst year of internet shutdowns on record, where authorities deliberately turned off the switch at least 283 times in 39 countries. During this session, we hope to explore the challenges that a lot of our countries and the countries in the region face from these shutdowns by highlighting regional trends and discussing their adverse impacts on human rights. We'll also examine specific case studies from different countries across the region, as well as think through of some recommendations that we and a lot of activists in our region can continue advocate against internet shutdowns. Before continuing, I just want to mention that there's interpretation available for those that want to listen to the session in Arabic, as well as sign language interpretation available. I'm happy to be joined in this discussion by three people who have worked and continue working in their respective roles and capacity in advocating against internet shutdowns in the MENA region and beyond. First, we have Marwa Fatafta, who leads Access Now's work on digital rights in the Middle East and North Africa region as the MENA Policy and Advocacy Director. Her work spans a number of issues at the nexus of human rights and technology, including content governance and platform accountability, online censorship, digital surveillance, and transnational repression. We also have Hanna Kreitem, who is the Senior Advisor for Internet Technology and Development for MENA with the Internet Society. Hanna is interested in peering infrastructure and shutdowns, as well as the socio-economics of the Internet. And last but not least, we have Mahsa Alimardani, who is a senior researcher at Article 19, working on digital rights in the MENA region with a focus on Iran. Mahsa has worked on issues related to human rights, technology, and freedom of expression online for over a decade within civil society and academia. Welcome to you all, and I'm happy to have you with us today. Before we jump into the discussion and we start the conversation, for the people watching us, please feel free to drop any questions or remarks that you have in the comment section, and we'll make sure to set some time at the end of the session to get back to them. Marwa, I'd like to start the conversation with you to learn more about the new Keep It On report that was just released a few hours ago, actually. So what were some of the key global highlights from that report, as well as the specifics that you can share with us regarding the Middle East and North Africa region?
Thank you, Kreitem, and hi, everyone. Great to be again on Bread and Net's sessions. And yes, today we've launched our Keep It On annual report, which documents internet shutdowns and patterns around the world. And we've been doing this work since 2016, and this year has accounts for the most internet shutdowns we've counted so far since we began this work as part of the Keep It On coalition. So around the world, for 2023, we've documented at least 283 shutdowns in 39 countries. That's close to 300 shutdowns, which is quite a big jump from last year, almost a 40% jump from the internet shutdowns we've documented last year. And the MENA region really is no exception to that draconian trend. So the highest, let's say, at the global level, the highest offenders are India, Myanmar. Third in line is Iran, and fourth is Palestine. And I will talk about the regional trends shortly. And I'm happy to see Mahsa and Hanna also joining the panel to deep dive into the context of these two specific countries or territories. For the MENA region, as I said, similar to the global trend, we have the highest number of shutdowns on record since 2016, with 77 shutdowns occurring in 15 countries across the region. And the triggers behind those shutdowns really vary. So as I mentioned, Iran, it takes, again, like the spotlight with being the highest offender or perpetrator of shutdowns in the region this year. It was also the same last year. And here, of course, it's important to highlight the context of the Mahsa Amini protests that were triggered in 2022. In 2023, the Iranian authorities continue to wield internet shutdowns as a tool for oppression, to silence dissent, to stop flow of information, and also to hinder mobilization among protesters. So in Iran, we've documented in 2023 at least 34 shutdowns, mostly occurring in context of protests. And that's a big jump from 19 shutdowns last year. Palestine comes next, and you mentioned already, Kreitem, the context of the genocide and the war in Gaza. And there again, we see how internet shutdowns or like internet access becomes a weapon of war, with often fatal consequences for populations that are enduring the most atrocious crimes and displacement. And so since October 7th, Israeli authorities have not only shut down the internet at least 14 times, but also they have targeted the ICT infrastructure and telecommunications infrastructure, and in big parts of Gaza that remains destroyed beyond repair, or, it would take decades for it to be properly repaired and for people to have normal access to internet. And normal in the context of Gaza, we're talking about 2G networks before the war. So we're talking about slow, unreliable, and unsafe connectivity. In addition to conflict and armed conflict and violence coinciding with shutdowns, we also saw last year one interesting pattern, I would say. One, in the context of Libya and Turkey during natural disasters, where the authorities in Turkey shut down Twitter following the massive earthquake that the country witnessed. And people were critical of the authorities and their response to the crisis, or their slow response to the earthquake. And the authorities resolved to shut down Twitter in order to quell criticism and protest online over government's lack of response or slow response to the crises. Libya, we've also seen the same with the flooding, which was quite disastrous and resulted in the displacement of tens of thousands of people and the tragic death of many, just as many. And again, we saw a similar reaction of authorities, hitting the kill switch as an immediate response. Lastly, and as you know very well, Qassem, since you work on this issue, we see this year governments in the MENA region continuing with their pattern of shutting down the internet during national exams, school exams, and particularly high school, which is quite a big deal in the region. And in order to stop, or claim to stop, cheating and leaking exam questions, governments again shut down the internet, either intermittently for a few hours or collectively. And so we've seen that in Iraq, in Algeria, in Syria, and this pattern also continued in 2023. And finally, I would say we continue to see blocking of platforms. And here,
okay, Google, set
seems
alarm
to be,
in 15 minutes.
Sorry. Yeah, I think someone is unmuted. But anyways, yeah, the last point I want to mention is that Grindr, which is a dating app, is blocked in a number of countries in our region, from Oman, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, and others. And according to the global trends, it's the most second blocked platform around the world outside of India. So we see again similar global trends being reflected in our region, and sadly that it does coincide with the rise of hate speech and retaliation against gender minorities for their sexual and gender identities. So overall, it's a really, like, it's bad news for our region, and it makes it all the very important that we all collectively join efforts to stop shutdowns and to fight against this draconian measure. So over to you, Qassem.
Thank you, Marwa. And indeed, it is a worrying trend that we're continuing to see across the region and globally as well. And I would like to get back to you later more on, on these trends in particular and where our attention should be focused more. But now I'd like to focus more on the context and case of Gaza. And Hanna, Marwa talked about 16 internet shutdowns that were imposed last year in the Gaza Strip by Israel. So I'd like to hear more from you about, the number of shutdowns that have been taken place since October the 7th. It's been now over 7 months. So I'd like, if possible, if you can give us an overview of the internet situation in the Gaza Strip since that date.
شكرا قسام ومروة، وشكرا لسنكس على إعطاء هذه الفرصة. في الحقيقة في غزة عدد عمليات قطع الإنترنت التي نوثقها في منصة بلس هو أقل بكثير من 16. هو واحد في الحقيقة، لأنه بدأنا بملاحظة هبوط في مستوى الإنترنت منذ مساء 7 من تشرين الأول بشكل ملحوظ، وزاد ذلك مع الأيام، حتى وصلنا إلى مرحلة تم فيها قطع تام لكل وسائل الاتصال مع القطاع. كان القطع من مساء 7 تشرين الأول هو ملفت للنظر، خاصة أنه شركات الإنترنت في قطاع غزة معتادة على قطع الكهرباء. أول التقارير التي ظهرت كانت تربط قطع الإنترنت بعدم توفر الكهرباء وقطع الكهرباء، لكن الشركات في القطاع يعني معتادة ومجهزة للعمل ساعات إذا لم يكن أيام بدون كهرباء، لأن هذا هو الوضع الطبيعي الواقع الحقيقي للحياة في غزة من ما قبل 7 تشرين أول. ومع الوقت زاد عدد الشركات الإنترنت التي اختفت عن الوجود في القطاع، وبالتالي أصبح مشتركيها غير قادرين على الارتباط باشتراكاتهم الموجودة حاليا. بعض الأشخاص كانوا محظوظين بيكون عندهم أكثر من اشتراك، أو محظوظين التواجد في مكان أو أماكن ما زال هناك فيها بعضا من بقايا الإنترنت. السبب الرئيسي الذي جعلنا نعتبر أن هناك قطع واحد للإنترنت حتى الآن 220 يوم حتى اليوم بحسب ما نحسبه، هو أنه منذ ذلك الوقت لم يرتفع مستوى أو عدد الأجهزة المرتبطة بالإنترنت من قطاع غزة فوق 15%. فبالتالي يعني حتى مع وجود القليل والجزء الضئيل من خدمة الإنترنت، هي ليست كافية لخدمة الأفراد الموجودين في القطاع. وحتى إذا نظرنا اليوم إلى عدد شركات الإنترنت أو الشبكات التي ما زالت موجودة على الإنترنت والتي يمكن أن نراها ونرى ما يسمى بالautonomous system numbers الخاصة بها، هو ربع الشبكات التي كانت في القطاع قبل 7 تشرين أول. فبالتالي بالنسبة لنا هو قطع واحد طويل متواصل حتى اليوم. لم ننشر عن القطع في بدايته في 7 أكتوبر، لأنه في الحقيقة يعني لم يكن لدينا ما يكفي من الإثبات بأنه هو متعمد. لكن وزارة الاتصالات الإسرائيلية ساعدتنا بأنهم نشروا تقرير عن تجهيزاتهم للحرب، وذكروا فيها أنهم اتخذوا تحضيرات وإجراءات لقطع الإنترنت والاتصالات عن قطاع غزة. لم يعترفوا حتى اليوم بأنهم قاموا بالقطع بشكل متعمد، لكن شكل هذا النشر نوعا من الإثبات بأنهم لديهم النية ولديهم التجهيز لذلك. نعرف أيضا من قبل أن قطاع الاتصالات في فلسطين مرتبط ارتباط كبير بمزودي خدمات الاتصالات والإنترنت على الجانب الآخر لأكثر من سبب، وأهمها وأولها هو الاتفاقيات الموقعة والتي تربط السوق الفلسطيني بالسوق الإسرائيلي بشكل أساسي. فبالتالي كان هناك النية وكان هناك القدرة. فمن ذلك الحين نحن نعتبر أن هناك قطع واحد للإنترنت. 16 حادثة المنفصلة والتي يوثقها التقرير بشكل صحيح هي حوادث تتعلق أكثر باختفاء كل وسائل الاتصال بشكل تام. القطاع يرتبط بالضفة الغربية بثلاث كوابل ألياف بصرية، ومع بداية الحرب تم تدمير كابلان وبقي كابل واحد. مع الوقت تم تدمير الكابل الأخير، لكن مع كل تدمير ومع كل تعطيل لخدمات الاتصالات كان هناك طواقم تقوم بإصلاح الأعطال بقدر الإمكان. للأسف هناك كان أيضا استهداف موثق لطواقم الإصلاح نفسهم، وهذا أدى بداية طبعا لفقدان عدد من الأرواح من الأشخاص المؤهلين لإصلاح الأعطال. فبالتالي قل بنسبة كبيرة عدد الأفراد الذين لديهم القدرة والمعرفة على إصلاح الأعطال الهندسية. وأصلا من قبل ذلك كان هناك نقص في العتاد والتجهيزات الموجودة في قطاع غزة، خاصة فيما يتعلق بالتقنيات تصليح الأعطال وغيرها، وحتى الكوابل نفسها. فبالتالي يعني إذا تم استهداف سيارة تصليح أعطال، هذا بالطبع أهم مخسر هو الخسارة البشرية، لكن أيضا العتاد والتجهيزات والموجودة في هذه السيارة يعني خسرناها أيضا. وهو شحيح بالأصل. فبالتالي قدرة الشبكات على الاستمرار في قطاع غزة قلت بشكل يعني بشكل أساسي وبشكل كبير جدا. فبالتالي الوضع حاليا في قطاع غزة هناك بقايا من شبكات، يعني وجزء منها ما زال يعمل، ويعني بالحقيقة يعني أقرب إلى المعجزة، لأنه ما زال يعمل. فبالتالي ما زال لدينا القليل من الاتصال بالأفراد الموجودين في القطاع. هذا باختصار عن القطاع الحالي بشكل سريع. هذا السؤال.
Thank you, Hanna, for painting that picture in what has been happening in Gaza since the 7th of October, and of course we'll get back more into details and on how the impact of these shutdowns, specifically on people that are living in the Strip. But now, Mahsa, I'd like to get to you, and Marwa mentioned that during last year there have been 28 reported shutdowns in Iran. But before getting more into that, I'd like to first ask you about how internet shutdowns have impacted the political discourse or activism in Iran over the past couple of years, especially in light of especially after the tragic death of Mahsa Amini.
Thanks, Kazem. Thanks for having me, and many thanks to Access Now for this really important report and basically prioritizing and building this movement with the Keep It On coalition, which is so important. And thank you to SMEX. The last time I was at Bread and Net, we were in the midst or at the very beginning of the Mahsa Amini protests, which, started at the end of 2022 and continued on to 2023. So I guess the bulk of what was happening is now documented in your report, and really we can see the continuation and sometimes intensification of that movement that started at the end of 2022. And we see this very tangibly with the increase in shutdowns that you've documented that changed from 2022 to 2023. I believe you documented 34 shutdowns in Iran, which grew from 19 in 2022, which is very significant. But I guess what is important and goes back to your question, Kazem, is the fact that internet shutdowns are not the only form of information or online controls that the regime uses. It's often what they turn to when they believe the domestic political threats are at the highest to the regime. So this is oftentimes when we see it implemented. There's a very great book that just came out recently that I would recommend to everyone that really documents tangibly the shifts that occur when regimes make the decision to move towards internet shutdowns. And it's called Repression in the Digital Age by Anita Goetz, where she tangibly does actually show when these threats facilitate the need for internet shutdowns and correlates it to actual state violence. And there's some really great documentation that shows this during the Syrian revolution, documenting internet shutdowns and the political and the correlation with the increase in deaths by the regime. But sorry for that tangent. What I mean to say is that, of course, internet shutdowns are not the only tool the regime has, but we did see them increasingly turning to it during the Mahsa Amini uprising or the Women Life Freedom uprising. And most significantly, as you also allude to in the report, we've been seeing it very targeted in regional ways. And so we were consistently seeing internet shutdowns or mass disruptions occur in Kurdistan or in Sistan and Baluchistan. And these are the provinces that have majority minorities who are often discriminated and heavily oppressed by the regime. So we have the Baluchis in Sistan and Baluchistan, who have had some of the biggest losses in terms of protest casualties, protesters murdered by the regime. And so we have subsequently also seen the highest amount of internet shutdowns that have continued on. And the internet situation in Sistan and Baluchistan continues on to be very unstable to this very day. And it is obviously in no small part due to the fact that this is an ethnic minority that is often opposed to the state. And of course, back in September 30th, 2022, we had one of the highest casualty rates during the Mahsa Amini protests in the city of Zahedan, in Sistan and Baluchistan, which of course coincided with heavy internet shutdowns. And so hundreds were killed that day after Friday prayers. The Baluchi community started their protests, and it was met with violent repression. And this has continued, obviously. There are many protests that follow Friday prayers in Sistan and Baluchistan, and we have continued to see disruptions, if not shutdowns. And so, yeah, just to put this on the map of what the regime turns to, it is often the most harrowing. But of course, we have consistent censorship that goes on across the Iranian internet. The use of circumvention tools, it is almost ubiquitous amongst the Iranian population. And really, when we're talking about access to a free and open internet, we have to really imagine access through many different hurdles that Iranians are quite savvy at overcoming to access the internet. But the main issue right now that also has an impact on disruptions is the fact that the authorities are heavily investing in censorship of circumvention tools, censorship of VPNs, and the ways that they are trying to constantly block different protocols associated with VPNs through different methods is having a significant impact on the health of the network. We continue to see disruptions. In fact, in the past couple of weeks, we've seen enormous disruptions across the Iranian internet that has been making access quite difficult. Obviously, there isn't much transparency from the authorities to see what's going on and why the health has deteriorated so much. But one of the assessments is these different types of methods they're using to target VPNs is having this kind of impact. And of course, it has an impact on access to VPNs because users in Iran are constantly looking for new and better VPNs to be able to access the internet and not have to rely, of course, on, domestic applications, which are easier to access.
Thank you, Mahsa. And we'll get back and talk more about, these different tactics that the regime in Iran is using. But now, Marwa, I want to get back to you about the new report. And you've talked a bit about some of the trends that have been documented across MENA and, some old ones and some new ones. So can you maybe talk a bit more about that, about the new trends that have been documented versus the previous years and the different reports that were published, as well as I want to get your opinion on what is the most concerning trend that you're seeing in MENA when it comes to internet shutdowns, and what are the specific trends where people across and activists across the region should mobilize and focus more their efforts.
Thank you, Qassem. I want to pick it up from where Mahsa left, and that is internet shutdowns are just one tool in the region's authoritarian toolkit in suppressing dissent, in silencing criticism, in cracking down on protests. And so to me, many of the trends or the case incidents of the shutdowns we've documented in our report continue to that pattern of rising authoritarianism, digital authoritarianism, and repression online, from prosecuting activists all the way to blocking websites or shutting down the internet for the entire population. In terms of all trends, I think I mentioned already in my introductory remarks that we see internet shutdowns during school exams that continue to be an ongoing trend since 2016. The good news is that some countries are finally listening, and I'm too hesitant to call it a win because I'm always afraid that authorities will switch in their, in implementing shutdowns whenever they deem it convenient. But for example, Jordan and Mauritania are two countries that are notorious for shutting down the internet during school exams, have refrained from doing so. And this year, together with ISOC, SMEX, and maybe Qassem, you can speak about the campaign yourself since you're leading on it. We're trying again, like to tell governments that this is not only a draconian measure that is a violation of people's rights, but it's also ineffective. So you're trying basically to stop a bullet train with your bare hands, if that's the right allegory. But it doesn't stop students from cheating. It doesn't stop exams questions from being leaked, but it does disrupt people's lives. It disrupts their businesses. It disrupts their access to government services, access to connecting with their loved ones, access to news. And therefore, it's a pattern we hope to see ending soon in the region. In terms of the newest trends, if you may, so I think we see the biggest one for me is that we see internet access becoming more and more a weapon of war and a military target. So that's the case in Sudan, that's the case in Palestine, but that was also the case in Yemen last year and a couple of years ago, where the ICT infrastructure becomes literally a military target. So that's the first to be bombed. And to build on Hanna's presentation, the shutdowns in the Gaza Strip or connectivity levels did indeed drop. And we also saw that pretty much as early as October 8th in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli military had bombed and targeted a number of ISP offices, from Paltel's main office in Gaza to a number of other smaller ISPs that were destroyed or had their offices or any of the other equipment destroyed. And that is really concerning, of course, because, again, like from the normative side, it's not only a violation of international law, but when we're talking about situations of war, of genocide, of chaos, of needing to relocate, needing to have access to life-saving information, aid, all of that gets disrupted. And so, we've been collecting testimonies from people inside of Gaza about how shutdowns have impacted their lives. And many of them testify that the shutdowns have been a psychological warfare no less damaging than the killing, bombardment, and displacement. It was overwhelming, the number of people who have literally said that for us, being deprived of talking to our loved ones, being deprived of losing access, can't call our friends that are, in Gaza, the majority of the population have been displaced, and not only once, but multiple times. And so imagine not being able to speak to your family or not knowing their whereabouts for 2 or 3 months or even 4 months. And to them, that level of pressure and anxiety is akin to being bombarded and killed. So that just speaks to how fatal shutdowns can be, and sometimes literally speaking, when people don't know what's happening right outside their door, they don't know where the location of the military, where the location of snipers, they don't know how they can access food safely or move safely within neighborhoods to relocate. And sadly, that is also the situation in Sudan, which is the worst humanitarian crisis. There are 1.9 people who are displaced, and we see horrors. And also we see how the warring parties, whether it be the rapid support forces or the Sudanese military, attacking ISPs, attacking mobile operators and their infrastructure, again, to wield pressure on the opposing party, and use it as a negotiation chip or a warring chip. And people are caught in the middle. People not able to, that want to leave the country, not being able to renew their papers. They're not able to, again, like, communicate with their loved ones, not able to have access to money, especially when there are like diaspora communities, and financial transfers are extremely important. So that is a growing trend we see, for sure, not only in the MENA region, but also around the world. And that's why, as Access Now, when the Gaza war happened, we called not only for a physical ceasefire, but also for a digital ceasefire, because we know that the internet is becoming another, battle arena, if you may, and authorities can use it in different ways, not only through shutdowns, but through cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, etc., etc. But to stick to the subject of the panel, yeah, I think the authorities realize how indispensable connectivity is to people and to their everyday lives, and therefore they use it as a weapon of war. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the most sticking point for me and the most worrying one. And as I said, just to wrap up, there are ongoing trends, like blocking platforms is unfortunately like just a knee-jerk reaction from many authorities in the region, that just simply, if they don't like a platform, they just simply block it altogether. So yeah, back to you, Qassem.
Thank you, Marwa. And yeah, you talked a bit about, internet shutdowns during exams. And while, yeah, there has been a slight improvement on that, I think there still needs to be a lot of work done in order to, continue advocating for no exam shutdowns. And this work will continue this year and the upcoming years. This year so far, we've sent an open letter to the authorities in Iraq to not shut down the internet. Last year, we've seen that the Ministry of Communication was hesitant in terms of shutting down the internet, but there was a lot of pressure from the Ministry of Education to shut it down, and that ended up being the case in Iraq. So we'll see how this situation goes this year, especially with exams approaching. But I want to pick up on what you talked about, Marwa, and how internet shutdowns, have become weapons of war. And I know, Hanna, that you talked a bit about, the different shutdowns that were documented in the Gaza Strip. But can you also talk a bit about, how these shutdowns have been weaponized in the context of Gaza, and maybe the different strategies and tactics that were used? And can you also maybe touch on, how these shutdowns have affected humanitarian efforts or access to critical services over the past couple of months?
Yes, thank you, Qasim. So بالعربي. شكرا قاسم. للأسف الوضع الحالي في قطاع غزة، زي ما قلنا، متابعين وعارفين، مأساوي لأبعد الحدود. ولكن كان هناك بعض بسيط بين حين وآخر. يعني مروة حكت، أعطت مثال عن قدرة الأشخاص على الاطمئنان على أحبائهم، على الأقل في مناطق مختلفة في قطاع غزة، مع نزوح عدد كبير أو أغلب سكان قطاع غزة من بيوتهم، وانتشارهم في مناطق مختلفة في القطاع. يبدو أن هناك مشكلة في الترجمة. I'll go on. مع نزوح أغلب سكان قطاع غزة من بيوتهم، وانتشارهم في مناطق مختلفة في القطاع، وحتى تركيزهم في مناطق مختلفة بمعنى أدق في القطاع، منها رفح وغيرها. ابتعد الأشخاص عن أحبائهم، عن أصدقائهم، عن معارفهم، عن عائلاتهم، إخوتهم، وأي شخص قد تعرفهم. فبالتالي كان هناك وسائل الاتصال كانت توفر ليس فقط معرفة واتصال بالخدمات المختلفة، لكن وسيلة اطمئنان على الحياة لأحبائنا والأشخاص المختلفين. أذكر أنا شخصيا أشتغل مع شخص موجود داخل قطاع غزة، ووردني اتصال منه بعد 4 أشهر من الغياب. وكان فعلا يعني هو ليس من عائلتي وليس حتى من أصدقائي، لكن مجرد الاطمئنان عنه يعني أعطاني دفعة كبيرة للأمام. ولا أستطيع تخيل ما تفعله وسائل الاتصال المختلفة للأشخاص الموجودين داخل القطاع وتحت القصف. القطع الذي كان يتم على القوابل أو الألياف البصرية الأساسية التي تربط القطاع بالضفة. والسبب الحقيقة أنا حتى الآن يعني لا أفهم سبب التصميم بهذا الشكل، أو تصميم البنية التحتية بهذا الشكل. حتى التليفونات الأرضية والهواتف المحمولة مرتبطة بالضفة، فبالتالي قطع الارتباط ما بين الضفة وغزة يؤدي إلى قطع تام في الهواتف الأرضية والمحمولة والإنترنت. قد يكون ذلك مرتبط بنظم الفوترة، وهو يعني قد يكون في الوضع الطبيعي قد نعتبره ممارسة عادية وطبيعية جدا، بحيث تكون نظم الفوترة هي مركزية وموجودة في مكان واحد. لكن في الوضع الموجود في فلسطين، مع عدم الاستمرارية الجغرافية ووجود القطع الجغرافي من بين منطقتين أو جزئين أساسيين من لا أسميه من مناطق السلطة، فبالتالي يعني كان يجب اتخاذ هذا الموضوع بعين الاعتبار عند تصميم البنية التحتية. وهذا شكل ضعف أساسي في البنية التحتية، ووجود نقطة واحدة يمكن استهدافها يتم قطع الاتصالات بشكل تام. كما أن هناك عدة تقارير عن استخدام أو أسلحة الاتصال، استخدام وسائل الاتصال كسلاح من خلال تحديد أماكن وجود الأفراد بحسب ارتباطهم ب سيلولار تاورز الموجودة حواليهم أو أبراج الاتصالات الموجودة حولهم. هاي كانت واحدة من الطرق التي تم استهداف الأفراد فيها. عودة للسؤال الأساسي، قطع الاتصال هو يعني سلاح كما ذكرت لا يستهدف فقط قطع المعلومات والتواصل، يستهدف أيضا السبيرت بتاعت الأفراد، يستهدف الأمل الموجود عندهم. وهذا كان شكل يعني سلاح أساسي تم استخدامه في هذه الحرب. كما أعتقد أنا، أو بحسب ما رأيناه في عدة قياسات مختلفة، بأن الإنترنت كانت موجودة في مناطق بسيطة جدا في القطاع، ولا زالت موجودة في مناطق بسيطة جدا في القطاع. قد يكون أحد أسباب إبقاء هذه المناطق على اتصال هي دفع الناس للوصول إليه. وهنا لا نتكلم فقط عن الإنترنت، لكن أيضا عن وسائل الاتصال بشكل عام. يعني بالتالي الأفراد يحتاجون بالإضافة إلى وسائل الحياة الأساسية، يحتاجون أيضا إلى اتصال مع أحبائهم ومع العالم. فبنظري كان هذه النقطة الأساسية هي نقطة تم استغلالها في عمليات إعادة تقسيم التجمعات السكانية في غزة. لك القسم.
Thank you so much, Hanna. And now I want to also turn back again to the context of Iran and Mahsa. You talked about, the total number of internet shutdowns in Iran being 34, and how the majority of these shutdowns being in the provinces of Sistan and Baluchistan, 28 to be exact. And you also discussed about, the censorship of VPNs, but I'm interested in learning more about this digital authoritarian playbook in Iran. We know that, for instance, some apps are being blocked, such as Signal. So can you tell us more about that and, how the tech-savvy people of Iran have been doing in, to manage bypassing these type of censorship as well as internet shutdowns in the country?
Yeah, so I guess when you're really looking at what you have to, I guess, ask what is not blocked in Iran, and very little of popular platforms and applications is not blocked in Iran. So with October 2022, we saw pretty much most of the spaces that were available that is not filtered close up. So we had the few remaining popular applications like WhatsApp and Instagram blocked. We had the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store also blocked. I believe the Apple App Store was later reopened in terms of them specifically blocking it. But as far as I have checked last, the Google Play Store, I believe, still remains blocked. And this is obviously very important because the majority of Iranians access the internet via their mobile phones, using mobile data, and the majority of devices are Android devices. So the Google Play Store is an essential platform for getting things like VPNs to bypass the censorship. So, but the censorship has existed for many, many years in Iran. And so it's quite funny if you talk to the potential of TikTok being banned in the US and you talk to Gen Z about it, they think of this as a very massive change in their lives. They won't be able to access TikTok. But if you talk to Iranian Gen Z and you're like, oh, there's another block going to be apped, they'll just shrug their shoulders and they'll be like, yeah, we know how to use VPNs. We know what a VPN is. I mean, I think this is just part of digital literacy for kids in Iran and probably many other countries in the region, knowing these things. So the fact that, VPNs are so ubiquitous really makes the fact that you have the censorship of the majority of these things a bit easier. Obviously, it's a hurdle, it's annoying, it's an extra thing you have to do. But it's something that's really part of the day-to-day life of Iranians. And of course, there is a grand strategy on why the majority of these apps are censored. And the strategy really is either these companies want to be present in Iran and cooperate with us. Of course, when they went to block Instagram, they sent a letter to Meta asking them to cooperate, to open offices in Iran, to work with them on censorship. And of course, I guess lucky for us, human rights advocates, Iran is a country where most American businesses do not want to cooperate with. It's not quite the same, I guess, with other not every authoritarian context is this way. So Meta obviously has not complied. And so it led to the censorship. But the overall policy is if these apps are not cooperating, they will be blocked, and we will try to coerce or push Iranians onto domestic applications. And this has really underpinned a lot of the policies that the authorities have been pushing, most recently with this really important bill that I know Access Now has been a key partner in advocating against, which is the User Protection Bill, which has been trying to really enact this concept of a national internet, to criminalize VPNs, and to really militarize control over internet infrastructure in Iran. And so this ethos of nationalization or domestication of the internet really underpins this need to censor. And then, of course, the more sinister aspect of the sinister is not the fact that Instagram, WhatsApp, and Signal are blocked. The more sinister aspect of this is that they're trying to now destroy and block VPNs. Back in January, there was a decree that even came from the Supreme Council of Cyberspace saying that they might even move towards criminal penalties for VPNs being used in Iran, which is really horrific to consider, especially the fact that we see, you know, patrols out on streets arresting and attacking women for wearing quote unquote bad hijab. We can assume that this could suddenly turn into them examining phones to see if VPNs are on the phones and further criminalizing folks for using this very essential tool to access. And that's not to say all the other methods I was talking about of technically trying to disable and block access to VPN use in Iran. So yeah, I guess that's the kind of censorship context we're working with in Iran.
Thank you, Mahsa. And I think it's very important for people across the region and, you know, because we've always seen these kind of trends transfer from one country to another. And one thing that a lot of the authoritarian governments do well is that, you know, they can kind of see that this technique is being used in Iran or in other countries, so they kind of, you know, implement it in their own cases and situations. Sometimes even they put a more authoritarian spin to it. I just want to remind everyone attending that if you have any questions or comments that we'd like us to address, please feel free to drop them in the chat section. And I know, Marwa, you talked about the situation in Sudan, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to have someone with us from Sudan. But I think it's really important to address what is happening there in the country. You talked about the humanitarian crisis that is happening in Sudan, and the country has been one country in the region that has always been consistent when it comes to internet shutdowns. Since 2018, we've at least documented a shutdown every year. And with the ongoing conflict between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese armed forces, this has been no difference. And we're seeing how the internet shutdowns are being used as a weapon of war. And as you mentioned, Marwa, as a bargaining chip with a lot of with some of these factions, you know, ordering data centers to block their services or attacking data centers. And we've seen earlier this year in February a long internet shutdown in Sudan, and you talked, Marwa, a bit about the impact that it has. But after that, we've seen a lot of conversations about satellite internet services, specifically the use of Starlink in Sudan. And I want to maybe shift the conversation a bit about some of these services, Starlink and other ones, because I think these discussions and Starlink pops up in different contexts. We've seen it in the context of Gaza, in the context of Iran, Ukraine, and now Sudan. And most recently, last month, I think we heard news that Elon Musk is planning to pull out its services from Sudan. So maybe I wanna have a round and get your opinions and 2 cents on this. Maybe I'll start with you, Marwa, especially in light of the recent call that was signed by, I think, almost 100 civil society organizations. So maybe I'll start with you and then get your opinion, Hanna and Mahsa, on these services as well.
Yeah, thank you, Qassem. That's an excellent point. And very quickly, so I would say Musk with Starlink has become has inserted himself to make, you know, Starlink as an important connectivity source, and especially in areas where internet connectivity is not stable, you know, or is under attack. That was the case in Ukraine, and now in Sudan, where people, even though satellite internet is expensive, still, you know, manage to have access to internet through Starlink. And as you said, the company, or Elon Musk, is warned that the company will pull out from places where they're not registered or they don't have a license to operate, which means for many people that they will be deprived of the connectivity that they've managed to get. For me, the most important lesson learned of all that story is that we cannot depend on private service providers that are in the shape and form of Elon Musk, because it's precarious, it's not reliable, and the calculations of Starlink, or of its owner Elon Musk, is mainly around where he sees there are some financial or maybe some political advantages that he can claim by providing that service. And so we saw how he was toying with providing Starlink in Gaza, saying, well, maybe we can provide it to humanitarians, but then of course the Israelis said there is no way that you can have it operate there. But he did visit Israel, and he is providing, I think, Hanna, correct me if I'm wrong, he is providing Starlink connectivity to the Israeli authorities, not to Lebanon, not at any other surrounding MENA countries. And right, as I said, like in Sudan, people are afraid of losing that connectivity. Honestly, you can never blame communities that are in dire need of connectivity, of relying on that service. But it just points to the ecosystem that we have, and the precarious situation of having to rely again on a private actor that doesn't necessarily hold the best interests of communities or their rights in mind.
Thank you, Marwa. Mahsa, you want to go next?
Yeah, I just like Marwa said, you can't really blame users who are in areas that are desperate for connectivity for turning to them. And I know this became a really big topic for Iran, and Iranians had a lot of hope and excitement when Musk tweeted, I'm activating Starlink in Iran at the height of protests. And of course, there were a lot of us that have worked in these spaces that kind of were very, very skeptical about this. And of course, I think there was a big push to get Starlink devices into Iran. But obviously, there are a number of issues there with safety, signals being detected, and what kind of pressure it puts under people. And we do know the authorities have been trying to crack down on Starlink's presence in Iran. But irregardless of Starlink, I think there should be a wider conversation about this technology and its potential. Clearly, satellite internet technology is a very promising prospect when we're discussing these authoritarian contexts and the possibility of having a free access to the internet. It would completely, I think, leave us to reimagine a lot of the norms we have in this space, such as internet sovereignty and regulation. A lot of this would have to be reimagined, which I don't think is an impossible task. We've been reimagining our communication spaces for decades and decades, which with the advent of all these new technologies. So I don't think it's something we should run away from, but there are inherent dangers in the fact that we do have this one company headed by this one billionaire personality. And I mean, I was having a conversation with a competition lawyer a few weeks ago discussing the complete kind of monopoly this one company and this one personality has over the future direction of this really exciting technology and potential for online freedoms, which is you have this company that both has control and monopoly over the way to transport this technology into space. They own the spaceships. So there really isn't that much space for competitors to come in and to also get low orbit satellites into space to compete with Starlink. And of course, you have Starlink with the resources and money to take this technology further. And to give them credit, there have been some exciting developments with things like direct-to-cell satellite connectivity potentials. Like these are all progresses in tech that's very exciting, but I think there should really be a push towards antitrust regulations for the future of this space. And I really think hopefully in the next kind of few years, a lot of digital rights companies, a lot of these legal-minded digital rights folks can start focusing on this area of, I guess, the trajectory of our space.
Thank you, Mahsa. Hanna, you want to maybe also talk a bit about it? And then we have two questions in the chat that I'll share after you go ahead, Hanna.
أتفق تماما مع ما قالته ماسا وقبلها مروة. بخصوص ستارلينك وغيرها من تقنيات الاتصال بالإنترنت باستخدام الأقمار الصناعية في مدارات الأرض المنخفضة. آم، بشكل عام هذه تقنيات من ناحية تقنية توفر فرص كبيرة جدا للوصول للأفراد في مناطق يعني كان من الصعب أو من المستحيل أو من غير مجدي ماديا الوصول لها في الشبكات التقليدية، خاصة مع ما ذكرته ماسا قريبة من النهاية. هو الأنظمة الحديثة التي لا تتطلب وجود نقاط اتصال ضخمة وقد تكون مباشرة إلى الهواتف أو نقاط اتصال بسيطة، فبالتالي هي يعني تقريبا نتخلص بشكل شبه نهائي من آم، آم، مزودي الميل الأخير كما يسمونه. ما يحدث في السودان ودول أخرى في أفريقيا، على فكرة هي ليست فقط السودان، هو أن ستارلينك تنسحب من مكان هي ليست موجودة فيه أساسا. هذا هو الواقع، يعني أنه ستارلينك كما ذكرت أيضا ماسا ما زال يتبع القوانين والأنظمة الموجودة حاليا والتي تنظم قطاعات الاتصالات. ستارلينك من ناحية قانونية هو غير موجود في السودان ولا في عدد كبير من دول أفريقيا، أغلب أفريقيا، هو موجود في بعض الدول، كينيا، رواندا، يعني بعض الدول، ليس بعدد كبير. فبالتالي هو ما حصل أنه ستارلينك سوف تمنع وصول من آه، الأجهزة المستقبلة التي تم تهريبها عبر الحدود من دولة إلى أخرى. يعني هي بشكل قانوني هي غير مش المفروض أساسا تكون موجودة في السودان. أم، لكن هذا بيفتح باب نقاش آخر، وهو يعني وجودها في السودان، وجودها في أماكن أخرى هو خط حياة للأفراد. فبالتالي هل إحنا نقطع عنهم هذا خط حياة أو غيره؟ ذكرت مروة أنه ستارلينك موجود في إسرائيل، صحيح. آم، تم وأيضا نفس النقطة السابقة، التغطية موجودة، يعني خدمة موجودة في قبرص، وكان أساسا سوف يعلن عنها في إسرائيل ضمن هذا العام. فبالنسبة للتغطية هي موجودة، منها تغطية تقنية، لكن المشكلة هي التغطية القانونية وتراخيص توفير الخدمة أو تزويد الخدمة. آه، حاليا المسموح لهم استخدام خدمات ستارلينك هم الحكومة الإسرائيلية وعدد من آم، الجهات التابعة لها، وأيضا مستشفى ميداني في قطاع غزة، مستشفى الإمارات. وهذا كان أيضا يعني تم السماح لهم من الحكومة الإسرائيلية. فهذا أيضا يعطينا فكرة بأن حتى وجود مثل هذه التقنيات في مكان مثل قطاع غزة يحتاج إلى موافقة الاحتلال حتى يتم وحتى يبقى. نعم، أتفق بشدة فيما يتعلق في هذه التقنية، وأتمنى فعلا أن يتم إعادة النظر في أسس كيف نرى خدمات تزويد الإنترنت من نواحي قانونية وتنظيمية.
Thank you, Hanna. And yeah, as Masa mentioned, I think there needs to be like a bigger discussion on, the role of these technologies and a lot of work that needs to be done around that. We have, I think, 9 minutes left, but there's 2 questions in the chat that I'd like us to address. The first one is for you, Hanna, and I would appreciate if you address it in English. It says, my apology if it was not addressed in Hanna's contribution, but could you say something about whether the internet shutdowns in Gaza have been due to the destruction, bombing of digital infrastructure, or are there also reports of even more intentional cutting of access by the IDF?
Thank you, Kassan. Thank you to whoever asked this question. So the thing is that we do not have enough information about what's going on in Gaza. Even that there are some heroes in Gaza that are conveying the message, some journalists that are giving us as much details as possible, but still we do not exactly know how the specific cable was cut. But having said that, it is also important to take into consideration that the knife that the IDF is using is very, very blunt. No operation is surgical, if you can call it. So it's very possible that they would bomb a whole building just to get rid of one access point. yeah, we cannot take out this possibility. But generally, we do not have much information about what's going on. The evidence that we have so far is that many networks were completely obliterated. It's also very, very important here to know that I've been trying to get access to some people that run ISPs in Gaza. I was successful in some I was not. They are prioritizing the safety of their staff and of their people there. So so some, even if their service was off, their source of income was gone, they are prioritizing the lives of people and the well-being of their families and so on. So that's also another thing to take into consideration. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Hanna. And the last question, and then maybe I'll start with you, Marwa, if you want to follow up on what Hanna mentioned, and then hand it to both you and Mahsa, which is part of my job is making technical support resources for activists and civil society figures trying to access the internet security. Are there any resources in terms of information and guides that are lacking for activists in this area or other resource gaps? So I'll start with you, Marwa, and then maybe go to Mahsa.
I mean, there are many guides out there. So depending on the specific needs of our asker, we're happy to maybe drop some links or provide those links. So really hard to just pinpoint to one source or one guide. Yeah, I don't know, Hanna or Mahsa, if there's one that sticks that just comes to your mind. But for me, there's multiple resources, and you can find those available on Access Now's website, on I believe Civicert's website. There are a few civil society resource centers, if you may, where you can find those guides, depending on the issue you want to tackle, whether it be doxing or hacking or cyber attacks or circumvention tools, yeah, depending on your need. And Qassem, if I may, just to chip in on the first question asked to Hanna. So I agree with Hanna that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what's happening in Gaza. But I think there are general indicators that point in the direction of intentionality. Hanna mentioned the Israeli Ministry of Communications explicitly and publicly saying that they're considering or examining shutting down the internet and telecommunications in the Gaza Strip. When the first blackout occurred on the 26th or the 27th of October and lasted for, I think, 36 hours or so, we wrote to Paltel, the biggest Palestinian telecommunications company, together with Human Rights Watch, just to ask why, what happened. So what happened, what was the trigger behind the shutdown? Because their announcement was in the beginning that the shutdown occurred because of heavy bombardment. And indeed, the shutdown coincided with intensive bombardment as the Israeli army was planning to start or commence its ground invasion in the Gaza Strip. What they told us was pretty illuminating. They indeed thought that the first shutdown was a result of heavy bombardment and infrastructural damage. But then they said that the internet was gone and then returned without any intervention from us, because, as Hanna said, everyone is a target in the Gaza Strip. So it's they can only do maintenance and repair work if they get safe passage from the Israeli authorities. And even then, even when they got safe passage, as was in the tragic case of two of their staffers, they were still targeted and killed. The fact that the internet was disconnected and then returned without any intervention or doing any repair work also points in the direction that it was intentional. And but again, we're talking also about a situation of massive infrastructural damage. I believe Peltel said like 500 of their cell towers, no, 80% of their 500 cell towers have been damaged, whether intentional or not. I think that's at this point is a side footnote, to be quite honest, because it makes it impossible for these companies to operate. Not to mention, of course, the blockade and lack of electricity and fuel, etc.
Thank you, Marwa. Hanna, wanna go?
Yes, I just want to add to the question that was asked, because it seems that the question was more about the what is lacking and if there's any gap. We have seen a lot of talk about some technologies like eSIMs and so on, and some touting it as the uh, saving hand for people in need. I think it's important to add resources that are related to these access technologies, to such resources and guides, especially that they basically rely on spillover effect. So they are a side effect from how cellular technology work. They rely mainly in the case of Gaza on spillover from cell towers that are around the Gaza strip mainly, and they can serve hundreds, potentially in the low thousands of people, but not more. But still, I think it's important to add resources to these sort of technology.
Thank you, Hanna. And we've seen the role and the different initiatives around eSIMs in Gaza, as well as in other countries in the past. We have 3 minutes left, and time is running, but I'd like to wrap the conversation by maybe a quick round of recommendations. Maybe I'll start with you, Mahsa, then pass it to Hanna and then Marwa. If you have like specific recommendations to all stakeholders in the specific context of Iran and Gaza, and then Marwa, if there's any specific recommendations that were highlighted in the Keep It On report that you'd like to share. Mahsa, over to you.
Yes, again, thanks so much to the Access Now team for this report and for keeping this topic at the forefront of digital right conversations. I think the contribution of making this a movement is really invaluable. And we see this because of the real life impacts we see because of internet shutdowns, because of state violence and repression. And of course, there's so many things we should be doing. I mean, I don't think this conversation over enacting competition law over the future of satellite internet should be ignored. I really hope we can have discussions around this. And I do hope that there is more focus into the needs of all these different users in these contexts and how they're facing their authoritarian regimes in terms of the needs they need. Of course, I've been honing in on Iran and the specific needs we need in this context, from development of satellite internet to more aggressive means to battle the cat and mouse game of censorship and crackdowns on VPNs that we're seeing in Iran, and seeing how we can really empower this fight through the platforms in terms of what they're offering to protect and empower their users in these contexts. What we see in developing technologies, either from more sophisticated VPNs to, like I said, satellite internet, and how all of these things can become tools for civil society and users against the very heavy-handed repression that's going on online and offline by regimes like Iran and others in the region.
Thank you, Mahsa. Hanna, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Kassam. I would like just to congratulate Access Now and the Keep It On coalition on the report, and I think it's critical at this point of time to start pointing out that the internet is no longer luxury. Internet and communication services in general are life-saving in some cases, and we need to protect them. They need to receive protection status as a civil infrastructure in times of war, and in my opinion, actions towards disruption access to the internet needs to be punished at highest level possible.
Thank you, Hanna. And yeah, Marwa, I'll pass to you.
Very quickly, first of all, just to say that this report is a culmination of really like the partners of Access Now and the Keep It On coalition, and it points to really the power of collective action in terms of documentation of internet shutdowns wherever they occur. It would have not been possible for Access Now to monitor shutdowns in so many countries without our partners. So first and foremost, thanks goes to them. Second point is that we have made it really, we've made that journey from making shutdowns, normatively speaking, a recognized violation of international law. There is no doubt whatsoever or justification for shutdowns. They are disproportionate. They are violating, and therefore, as Hanna said, they need to be punished. I think right now, to build on Hanna and Mahsa's points, there are critical conversations that we need to have, especially on the regulation side around new technologies, and not only on regulation, but also for organizations like us and other grassroots activists that work with people on the ground, thinking of solutions that we can provide to communities and to people when they are deprived of that access. And I think Gaza points to us, makes it very clear that sometimes these tools are, tools that we use in different contexts are simply not feasible. So we need to think about long-term solutions, sustainable solutions. And finally, I would say, in terms of litigation, I think we need to do more in litigating against cases of shutdowns in international courts, including in the ICC and the ICJ, and working with UN mechanisms to investigate, document, and highlight the devastating impacts of internet shutdowns on people and their ability to exercise the rights. And in some cases, even that can be seen as a part of state policy to commit atrocity crimes. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that these two, that shutdowns and atrocity crimes are becoming interlinked and intertwined, and it's time for us to explore more accountability efforts on that front. Thank you, Qassem, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Marwa, Hanna, and Mahsa. Again, you all mentioned that we've made strides and we've made progress, but still there needs to be some work done. And at the end of this conversation, I want to thank you, Marwa, Mahsa, and Hanna as well as everyone attending, and BreadNet and SMEX for convening us and for giving us this platform and opportunity to continue this discussion. And we hope to continue this conversation and other ones, hopefully in person soon. Thank you.